If you dance this waltz, I'll marry my son to you, William Thompson III sneered loudly enough for all of Manhattan's elite to hear, pointing his champagne glass at the black woman who had just stumbled and dropped a crystal tray on the marble floor of the ballroom. The deafening sound of shattering glass silenced the 200 guests at the opening party for Thompson Holdings' new skyscraper. All eyes turned to Keisha Williams, 35, who had been working as a contract cleaner at the gallery event for just 3 weeks. "Dad, you're being ridiculous," whispered Jonathan Thompson, 28, embarrassed by his millionaire father's cruel joke. But William completely ignored his son's disapproval, clearly drunk on power and the $1,000 whiskey he had been drinking all night. "No, let me finish," William continued, walking to the center of the room as if he were presiding over a court of law. "This person obviously doesn't have the coordination to clean properly. How about we test her to see if she can even move to the beat?" Keisha remained kneeling, picking up the crystal shards with trembling hands, but her eyes revealed something no one there could decipher. It wasn't humiliation or fear, it was a deep calm, as if she were evaluating every word, every cruel laugh, every look of contempt she received. "Mr. Thompson," the event manager intervened discreetly, "perhaps it would be better." "Better nothing." William cut him off, gesturing dramatically. "Play a waltz. If she can dance better than my wife, I'll marry my son to her on the spot. Just imagine. The heir to the Thompson fortune marrying the cleaning lady." Collective laughter echoed through the hall like a wave of collective cruelty. Some women covered their mouths, pretending to be shocked, but clearly enjoying the spectacle. The men shook their heads, as if witnessing a perfectly acceptable comedy of bad taste. Keisha finally stood up, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked directly at William Thompson. For a moment that seemed like an eternity, she remained silent, as if making a decision that would change not only that night, but the entire power dynamic of that room. "I accept," she said in a clear voice that cut through the air like a sharp blade. The hall fell completely silent. Even the orchestra stopped playing, confused by the unexpected turn the situation had taken. William blinked several times, thinking he had heard wrong. "What did you say?" he asked, his arrogance momentarily shaken by the unexpected response. "I said I accept your challenge," Keisha repeated, now with a subtle smile that sent an inexplicable shiver down the spines of some of the guests. "But when I dance better than your wife, you will keep your word." Even if it was said as a joke. At that moment, while everyone mocked and laughed even louder, thinking they were witnessing the biggest embarrassment of the decade, no one noticed the familiar gleam in Keisha's eyes, the same gleam that had once mesmerized audiences on some of the world's most prestigious stages, before a single night of tragedy completely changed the course of her life. If this story of prejudice and twists and turns is piquing your curiosity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what is about to happen in that ballroom will show that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake a person ever makes. William's wife, Victoria Thompson, a 50-year-old woman known for her ballroom dancing lessons to Manhattan's elite, approached with a venomous smile. "Darling, do you really think I need to lower myself to compete with this?" she said, gesturing dismissively toward Keisha. "Don't be modest, Victoria," William replied, clearly enjoying the situation. "You won that club waltz trophy last year. That should be more than enough for this demonstration." Keisha watched silently, but her mind flew back 15 years, when she was known as Keisha Moreau, principal dancer with the American National Ballet. She remembered the nights when entire audiences rose to their feet in ovation, the reviews that compared her to the greatest ballerinas in history, the feeling of flying across the world's most prestigious stages. It had all ended in one tragic night. A special performance for the political elite, a car accident on the way home, 3 months in a coma, and a cruel awakening to reality. Her legs would never be the same again. The doctors said she would be lucky if she could ever walk normally again. Dance professionally? Impossible. "Jonathan," said William, turning to his son, "go get your camera. I want to record this moment for posterity. The day a cleaning lady tried to pass herself off as a dancer at my event." Jonathan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Dad, this has gone too far. The girl was just doing her job." "The girl," William cut him off sarcastically, accepted the challenge. "And now she's going to entertain us. Or would you rather I tell your girlfriend about that embarrassing situation last week?" Jonathan's face paled. Keisha realized that blackmail was involved, yet another demonstration of the toxic control William exerted over everyone around him. "Put the music on," William ordered the DJ, "and place your bets. $500 for those who bet on my wife to win, $1,000 for those brave enough to bet on the employee. Cruel laughter echoed through the room. Some guests actually began placing bets, treating the situation as free entertainment. Victoria positioned herself in the center of the dance floor, doing a few theatrical stretches to show off her experience. "You know what," William said, approaching Keisha with a wicked smile. "When you lose, and you will lose, I want you to get down on your knees and apologize for wasting everyone's time. And then, obviously, you're fired." It was at that moment that something changed in Keisha's eyes. The same determination that had led her to dance on international stages, the same strength that had made her fight through months of physical therapy just to walk again, the same dignity that had kept her alive when she lost everything she had worked for her entire life. "Mr. Thompson," she said with a calmness that sent an inexplicable chill down the spines of some of those present, "when I win, and I will win, I want you to keep your word about the marriage. But I also want something else." William raised his eyebrows, amused by her audacity. "Oh, she wants to make demands now. Very well, amuse me. What else do you want, besides marrying my son? I want you to admit, in front of all these guests, that you judged a woman wrongly based on the color of her skin and the work she does. And I want a public apology." The room tensed. Some guests whispered among themselves, recognizing that the situation had taken a more serious turn than they had expected. William laughed loudly. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. All right, I accept. But when you make a fool of yourself, you'll leave here not only without a job, but without any dignity left." What William Thompson III didn't know was that he was about to face not just a cleaning lady with a mysterious past, but a woman who had lost everything once and knew exactly how hard it was to fight for every crumb of respect in a society that had rejected her. While Victoria prepared herself with basic ballroom dance moves, across the dance floor a silent storm was brewing, because there is a brutal difference between someone who learned to dance as a hobby and someone who was born to make dance her universal language, even when fate tried to take it away from her forever. While Victoria warmed up with basic ballroom dance moves, Keisha stood motionless in the corner of the dance floor, but her mind was working like a precision machine. 15 years of brutal physical therapy, of learning to walk again, of accepting that she would never be the same, had forged in her a resilience that none of those spoiled rich kids could understand. "Look at her," one of the guests whispered to her friend. "She's probably never stepped on a dance floor in her life. What unnecessary humiliation." William Thompson circled the room like a satisfied predator, collecting bets from the guests and deliberately increasing the humiliation. $500 says she can't even make it through the song without tripping, he announced, raising a glass of champagne. $1,000 for anyone who bets she'll run out in the middle of her performance. Laughter echoed throughout the room, but Keisha noticed something William didn't. His son Jonathan wasn't laughing. In fact, the young man seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation, shifting uneasily near the wall and avoiding the gaze of the crowd. It was then that she noticed something familiar about Jonathan's face. It wasn't the first time she had seen him. 3 weeks ago, when she started working at Thompson Holdings events, she had noticed a young man who always treated the contract workers with respect, unlike the other executives. It was him. "Miss," said a low voice beside her. Keisha turned and saw a black man in his 60s, wearing the discreet uniform of the building's security team. "I'm Marcus, head of security. I've worked here for 20 years. He approached discreetly, pretending to check something on his radio. "I saw you dance before," he murmured, so low that only she could hear. 15 years ago, at the National Theater. Keisha Moreau, principal soloist. I was security there too." Keisha's heart raced. Someone had recognized her. After all these years of keeping her identity a secret, working in anonymous jobs to survive, someone finally knew who she really was. "I thought you died in the accident," Marcus continued, his eyes revealing a mixture of shock and admiration. "The newspapers said you'd never dance again." "The newspapers said a lot of things," Keisha replied, keeping her voice steady. "Not all of it was true." Marcus nodded slowly. "What they did to you was an injustice. And what they're doing now," he glanced in William's direction, who was still laughing loudly, "is even worse." At that moment, Keisha made a decision she had been putting off for 15 years. Not just about dancing, but about who she really was and what she was willing to reveal to the world. "Marcus," she said, "I need a favor. After I dance, no matter what happens, I need you to record everything that follows. Especially the reactions." He looked at her confused, but nodded. Sure, but why? Because, Keisha smiled for the first time that night, some people need to be reminded that underestimating someone based on their appearance can be the most expensive mistake of their lives. Meanwhile, William had decided to make the spectacle even more cruel. You know what, he shouted to the entire room, let's make this more interesting. If she can finish the song without falling or stopping, I'll give her $1,000. But when she fails, and she will fail, I want her to clean this entire room on her knees, in front of all of us. The crowd reacted with a mixture of laughter and some uncomfortable murmurs. Some guests began to realize that the situation had crossed the line, but no one had the courage to confront William Thompson III. Dad, Jonathan tried once more, this has gone too far. Shut up, Jonathan, William snapped. You're too soft. That's exactly why you need to learn how the real world works. There's a natural hierarchy, and people like her, he pointed at Keisha, need to know their place. It was at that moment that Keisha began to move. Not to position herself on the dance floor, but to stretch. The movements were subtle, almost imperceptible to most of those present, but Marcus recognized them immediately. They were the preparatory exercises she did before every performance at the National Theater. My God, Marcus muttered to himself, she's really going to do this. Victoria Thompson, realizing that attention was beginning to turn to Keisha, decided to begin her presentation. Start the music, she ordered, let's get this charade over with. The DJ, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, put on a classical waltz. Victoria began to dance alone, executing competent but predictable ballroom dance moves. She had learned to dance at elite clubs with expensive private teachers, but her technique was clearly amateurish by professional standards. Still, she received polite applause from the audience. After all, to that audience, she represented everything they considered appropriate: rich, white, educated in the best social circles. Well done, dear, said William, applauding exaggeratedly. Now it's time for our guest artist. Keisha slowly walked to the center of the dance floor. Each step was measured, controlled, laden with a dignity that began to make some of those present uncomfortable. This was not how a defeated person was supposed to behave. What song would you like? Asked the DJ, more out of politeness than genuine consideration. The same one, Keisha replied simply. But from the beginning. William laughed. Oh, she wants a second chance. How lovely. All right, play the song. Let's see how long she lasts before she gives up. What none of them knew was that Keisha had strategically chosen that song. It was a waltz she had danced hundreds of times during her career, one of the pieces she knew by heart, which flowed through her muscle memory like second nature. More importantly, it was one of the last performances she had given before the accident, a night when she had received a 5-minute standing ovation at the National Theater in a performance that critics had described as transcendent and one of the most emotionally devastating performances in the history of American dance. As she waited for the music to begin, Keisha closed her eyes and allowed her memories to take her back to that night 15 years ago. She remembered the feeling of flying across the stage, the deep connection with each musical note, the absolute certainty that she had been born to do this. The doctors had said she would never dance again. The media had speculated that her career was definitely over. She herself had believed it for years, until slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild not only her muscles, but her relationship with dance. She had never returned to the stage. She had never tried to resume her career. But she had never stopped dancing in secret, alone, during the most difficult moments of her new life. The music began, and with it, something extraordinary was about to happen in that hall full of prejudice and arrogance. Under the weight of all those condescending glances, her hands positioned themselves with a precision that made some of the musicians frown, instinctively recognizing that they were about to witness something far beyond a simple amateur dance. But what none of them could have imagined was that those first few bars would mark not only the rebirth of a lost legend, but the moment when the entire power structure of that environment would be permanently shaken. The first bars of the waltz echoed through the hall, and Keisha began to move. It was not the hesitant steps everyone expected to see. Instead, she rose with a grace that made the air in the room change instantly, as if gravity had lost some of its power over her. Her first movements were subtle, almost shy, allowing the audience to keep their expectations low. But as the music gained momentum, something extraordinary began to happen. Each step became more fluid, each turn more precise, each movement charged with a deep emotion that began to mesmerize everyone present. William Thompson stopped laughing. Victoria stopped smiling. The entire room began to realize that they weren't watching a cleaning lady trying to dance. They were witnessing an artist reclaiming her place in the world. "My God," someone in the audience murmured. She's exceptional." Keisha performed a sequence of pirouettes that would be challenging for any professional ballerina, followed by a grand jeté that lifted her into the air with a lightness that defied physics. These were not ballroom dance moves. This was classical ballet of the highest order, masterfully adapted to the waltz. Marcus, keeping his promise to Keisha, had discreetly positioned his cell phone to record not only the performance, but the audience's reactions. Especially the reactions of William Thompson, whose face had gone from scorn to confusion, then to something close to terror. "This is impossible," William whispered to himself, his voice catching. "Who the hell is this woman?" It was when Keisha performed the final sequence of her old National Theatre performance, a combination of movements that had been her trademark, a unique fusion of classical techniques she had created herself, that the truth began to strike some of those present like a bolt of lightning. "Wait a minute," said a woman in the audience, a patron of the arts who attended every major cultural event in the city. "I know those moves. I've seen that sequence before, but where?" Jonathan Thompson was completely mesmerized, his camera capturing every second of the performance. Unlike his father, he recognized genius when he saw it, regardless of who displayed it. When the music reached its climax, Keisha performed a series of fouettes, continuous turns on one leg, that left the entire audience speechless. These were movements that required not only perfect technique, but years of training and extraordinary physical strength. The music came to an end, and Keisha finished in a pose that was simultaneously powerful and vulnerable, her arms outstretched, her head held high with absolute dignity, her breathing controlled despite the intensity of the performance. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. It was the kind of silence that occurs when an audience witnesses something that transcends their wildest expectations. Then slowly, one person began to applaud. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding with an intensity that made the windows rattle. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Extraordinary!" echoed another. William Thompson was pale as a ghost, realizing that he had just been completely humiliated by someone he considered inferior. Worse, he had done so in front of Manhattan's elite, who now looked at him with a mixture of disapproval and embarrassment. It was at that moment that Marcus approached Keisha, still recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "allow me to introduce Keisha Moreau, former principal soloist with the American National Ballet." The name echoed through the hall like a bomb. Several people gasped, others let out exclamations of shock. Keisha Moreau was a legend, a ballerina who had mysteriously disappeared at the height of her career after a tragic accident. "Impossible," Victoria Thompson stammered. "Keisha Moreau is dead. Or at least, she never danced again after the accident." "Clearly," said Keisha, finally breaking her silence, "the rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated." The crowd laughed, but William Thompson wasn't finding it funny at all. The reality of what had happened began to hit him like a freight train. He had publicly humiliated one of the greatest entertainers in American history. And worse, he had done so on tape. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said, still holding the cell phone, "you said that if she danced better than your wife, you would marry her to your son. I believe this entire audience can attest to the fact that the condition has been more than met." Jonathan, realizing where the situation was going, approached Keisha. "Miss Moreau," he said, "I would like to publicly apologize for my father's behavior. It was inexcusable." "Jonathan, shut up!" exploded William, his mask of control finally slipping completely. "You will not apologize to anyone. Especially not to her." It was at that moment that Keisha revealed the true extent of her plan. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "I believe we have a marriage proposal to discuss. After all, a man of your standing surely keeps his word, doesn't he?" The audience fell silent, realizing they were witnessing something much greater than a simple display of talent. "You must be crazy if you think I'm going to honor a drunken joke," William growled, his arrogance returning in the form of desperation. "Ah, but it wasn't a joke," Keisha said, smiling. "Marcus, could you play back the recording of Mr. Thompson's statements from tonight?" Marcus held his cell phone high enough for everyone to hear as he played back the clear recording of William making the bet, doubling the conditions, increasing the humiliations, and publicly declaring that he would marry his son to her if she won the challenge. "And here he is confirming the terms," the recording continued, "even after I specified that he would have to keep his word." The audience murmured, some laughing nervously, others clearly embarrassed by the situation William had created for himself. "That's blackmail," William shouted, completely losing his composure. "No," Keisha corrected calmly, "this is accountability. You made a public bet, with clear terms, in front of 200 witnesses. Now you have to decide if you are a man of your word or if your reputation is worth less than your prejudice." Jonathan moved closer to Keisha. "Miss Moreau," he said, "if you will allow me, I would like to honor my father's word. Not because I am forced to, but because any man would be honored to marry someone of your talent and dignity." The audience murmured, surprised by the unexpected romantic turn. William was now visibly shaking with rage. "Jonathan, if you do this, you're out of the company, out of the family, out of everything." "Then so be it," Jonathan replied, extending his hand to Keisha. "Some things are more important than money, Dad. Like having integrity." Keisha looked at the outstretched hand, then at the audience, then at William Thompson, who was clearly having what appeared to be a nervous breakdown in public. "Mr. Thompson," she said, 15 years ago, people like you decided I had no value after I became imperfect. Today, you tried to humiliate me based on the color of my skin and the work I do to survive. But you know what I've discovered? True nobility doesn't come from inheritance or bank accounts. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think no one is watching." She turned to Jonathan. "Your son seems to have learned that lesson, despite your best efforts. As for the proposal," she smiled, "I'll accept dinner with him. But marriage, well, that's something two people decide together, based on love and respect, not humiliating bets." The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it wasn't just for the dance, it was approval for the dignity and wisdom Keisha had shown. William Thompson, realizing that he had lost not only the bet but the respect of everyone present, including his own son, muttered something about leaving it to the lawyers and left the hall, followed by Victoria, who was clearly mortified by the whole situation. Marcus stopped recording and approached Keisha. "This is going to be very interesting when it hits social media," he said with a smile. And as Manhattan's elite continued to process what they had just witnessed, a lesson in prejudice, humility, and the difference between social class and true class, one question remained in the air. How would William Thompson, a man who built his empire on his reputation, deal with the fact that his arrogance and prejudice had been exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible, and that this exposure was about to spread far beyond that ballroom? Marcus's recording spread across social media like wildfire. In less than 24 hours, "Millionaire humiliates legendary ballerina" had become a worldwide trending topic, racking up millions of views and indignant comments. William Thompson III woke up the next day to discover that his company had lost $3 million contracts overnight. His partners were demanding an emergency meeting, and his wife Victoria had locked herself in their bedroom, refusing to appear in public. "Dad," Jonathan said when he found his father in his office, surrounded by newspapers with devastating headlines, "The board has voted. You have 1 hour to resign, or you will be removed by force." William looked at his son, seeing for the first time not submission, but determination. "You did this," he murmured. "You betrayed me." "No," Jonathan replied calmly. "You betrayed yourself the moment you decided your arrogance was worth more than your humanity." Meanwhile, Keisha was being bombarded with offers. 3 international ballet companies wanted her to choreograph special performances. Lincoln Center had called offering a solo event. Hollywood producers were interested in turning her story into a movie. But the offer that touched her most came from an unexpected group, the children at the community school where she had taught before working for Thompson Holdings. They had pooled their savings, $23 in all, to offer her a scholarship to return to teaching. "I'll take it," Keisha said tearfully, "but on one condition. Let's turn this into something bigger." 6 months later, the Keisha Moreau Center for the Arts opened in the heart of Manhattan, funded by donations that poured in from around the world after her story went viral. Jonathan Thompson, now running a completely revamped version of the family business focused on social responsibility, was the first major donor. William Thompson, meanwhile, had lost everything. His company, his reputation, his family. Victoria had filed for divorce and moved to Europe. He was last seen working as a low-level consultant at a small company, a shadow of the arrogant man who once believed that money gave him the right to humiliate other human beings. "You know what impresses me most about this whole story?" Marcus said during the center's opening, watching Keisha teach a class of diverse, smiling children. It wasn't just a victory over prejudice. It was a lesson in how true nobility responds to cruelty. Keisha, now recognized once again as one of the greatest artists of her generation, smiled as she watched her new students perform their first ballet steps. Sometimes, she said, we have to lose everything to discover who we really are. And sometimes, people have to lose everything to learn who they should never have tried to be. Jonathan approached, carrying flowers from the garden he had planted around the center himself. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, offering his arm to Keisha. "Ready," she replied, accepting not only his arm but the new life she had built on the ashes of her old one. Keisha's true revenge wasn't destroying William Thompson. It was building something so beautiful and inspiring that his cruelty seemed insignificant in comparison. She proved that when we face prejudice with dignity and respond to hatred with excellence, we don't just win, we transform the world around us. What about you? Have you ever faced someone who tried to diminish your dreams based on prejudice? Tell us your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that the best response to those who underestimate us is simply to be extraordinary.